March 1946. A small hearing room at Fort Missoula, Montana. The air thick with tension, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. 24-year-old Akira Yamamoto stood before a panel of three American officers, her hands trembling, despite her best efforts to remain composed. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet. Through the window behind the officers, she could see the Rocky Mountains rising against a pale spring sky, indifferent to the fate being decided in this cramped room. Lieutenant Chen sat to her left, professional mask firmly in place, but eyes betraying concern. To her right, ranch foreman Daniel Hayes' weathered hands, gripping his hat so tightly his knuckles had gone white. And across the table, Colonel James Bradford watched her with eyes like winter ice. "I request to remain in United States," Akira said in careful English, each word measured and deliberate. "I do not wish to return to Japan." Bradford's jaw tightened. The folder before him contained everything he needed: service records, intelligence reports, a paper trail that told a story she had hoped would remain buried. "You are a prisoner of war," he said, voice cold and precise. "You do not have the right to choose." But what Bradford did not know, what none of them except Hayes understood, was the full weight of the secret that connected them. Akira had been a signals operator in Okinawa, June 1945. She had coordinated artillery strikes against American positions. And one of those strikes, one specific coordination of fire on June 18th, had killed Billy Hayes, Daniel Hayes' nephew, the boy he had raised like a son. And somehow, impossibly, the man whose family she had helped destroy was the one standing beside her now, ready to defend her right to stay. To understand how a Japanese prisoner of war came to stand in that room asking for mercy from her enemy, and to understand why that enemy chose to grant it, you need to go back 7 months earlier, to a September morning when everything was still uncertain, when forgiveness seemed impossible, and when the simple act of cooking rice would begin to change everything. September 15th, 1945. The war had been over for exactly 1 month. Across America, soldiers were coming home to parades and tearful reunions. In prisoner of war camps from California to Georgia, German and Italian prisoners prepared for repatriation, eager to return to homelands they had not seen in years. But in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, something different was unfolding. The military transport truck rumbled down the dirt road, kicking up dust that hung in the autumn air like smoke. Inside, 40 Japanese women sat in silence. They wore a mixture of tattered Imperial Army auxiliary uniforms and clothing provided by the Red Cross during their long journey across the Pacific. Their faces were carefully composed masks of dignity that could not quite hide the fear in their eyes. Akira pressed her forehead against the truck's canvas side, trying to glimpse the landscape they were entering. Everything here was vestige, open. The mountains rose in the distance like the backbone of some ancient creature, snow already dusting their peaks despite the lingering warmth of early fall. The sky stretched forever, impossibly blue and empty. In Japan, mountains and buildings created intimate spaces. Here the emptiness made her feel exposed, vulnerable, small in a way she had never felt before. The truck slowed. Through the gap in the canvas, she saw wooden buildings surrounded by fence wire. 6 barracks arranged in neat rows, a larger structure that must be the mess hall, an administration building flying the American flag. It looked more like a modest ranch compound than a military prison, which somehow made the situation feel even more surreal. The truck stopped. The canvas flap was pulled back, revealing an American soldier, young and nervous. "Out," he said in English, gesturing. The women descended one by one, blinking in the bright Montana sunlight. Lieutenant Grace Chen stood waiting for them. 32 years old, Chinese-American, she wore her uniform with careful precision. Her parents had spent 3 years in an internment camp in California, released only months before. The irony of now guarding Japanese prisoners was not lost on her. She watched the women line up, saw the exhaustion in their postures, the confusion in their eyes. Among the arriving prisoners, Akira stood near the front. 24 years old, small in stature, but with eyes that took in everything. She clutched a small cloth bag containing the few possessions that had survived her capture. Inside was a letter from her mother written months before the firebombing of Tokyo, before everything burned, before everyone died. Beside her stood Hana Mizuki, just 20, who had worked as a radio operator in Okinawa. Her small frame seemed to shrink further as she took in the vast Montana landscape. Everything here was so exposed, so quiet. It was a strange quiet, empty of the constant noise of cities and war. Near the back of the group stood Sachiko Watanabe, 45 years old, the eldest among them. She had worked in administrative support in Manila. Unlike the younger women whose faces showed fear, Sachiko's expression was carefully neutral, years of experience teaching her to reveal nothing. Near the fence, Daniel Hayes watched the new arrivals. 43 years old, skin weathered from decades of ranch work, he had managed prisoner labor for 2 years during the war. German prisoners who had helped bring in harvests while local boys fought overseas. But this was different. These were women, and the cultural gap seemed impossibly wide. Ben Carter, a young cowboy of 22 who served as guard, leaned against the fence post beside Hayes. "Never thought we would be guarding Japanese women out here in Montana," he muttered. "Do not even know what to say to them." Hayes nodded slowly. "Reckon we will figure it out. We always do." But his voice carried uncertainty. In his pocket, he carried a letter. The last one Billy had sent before Okinawa, before an artillery strike had turned his nephew into a name on a casualty list. Billy's words, written in careful script: "Uncle Dan, if something happens to me, do not let it make you hate. Promise me." Hayes had made that promise, but keeping it was proving harder than he had imagined. The first weeks at the facility were marked by careful distance and mutual suspicion. The Japanese women followed camp routines with mechanical precision, their military training evident in every movement. They rose at dawn, maintained their barracks with meticulous care, tended meals in silent formation. Their faces remained unreadable, their conversations limited to whispered Japanese during brief periods when they were left to themselves. Chen established basic rules through an interpreter, David Suzuki, a Japanese-American soldier who had volunteered for the assignment despite his family's recent internment. The women would be assigned light work duties. They would receive the same rations as American personnel in accordance with Geneva Convention requirements. They would be treated with the dignity afforded to prisoners of war. But dignity was complicated when cultures clashed so completely. The first morning in the mess hall became an immediate crisis. The American cook served eggs, bacon, toast, and coffee, standard breakfast fare for the ranch hands and guards. The Japanese women stared at their plates with barely concealed dismay. Several pushed the food around without eating their stomachs, rebelling against unfamiliar, heavy breakfast. Akira forced herself to eat, remembering her father's words about maintaining strength and discipline in difficult circumstances. But the greasy bacon sat heavily in her stomach. The coffee tasted unbearably bitter. She noticed several younger women fighting back tears as they struggled with the meal. It was such a small thing, food. Yet it made their displacement feel overwhelming and absolute. Hayes observed this from across the mess hall. He had seen similar reactions from German prisoners initially, though they had adjusted more quickly to American food. He approached Chen after breakfast. "Ma'am, might be worth finding out what kind of food they are used to. Cannot have them getting sick because they cannot keep our meals down." Through Suzuki's translation, Chen asked about Japanese dietary preferences. The response was halting and careful. Rice, the women explained. They ate rice with every meal in Japan. Vegetables, fish when available, miso soup, pickled foods. The American breakfast of meat and bread felt wrong in every way to their bodies and their sense of what food should be. Hayes scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Rice. We have got some in the storehouse. Bought it during the war when wheat was being rationed. Never quite figured out how to cook it right, though. Always comes out sticky or burnt." Hana looked up at this comment. Her English was limited, but she had understood the word rice. For the first time since her arrival, something flickered in her eyes that was not fear or resignation. It was the smallest spark of recognition, of connection to something familiar in this utterly foreign place. That evening, the women returned to their barracks and spoke in urgent whispers about the strange American foreman who admitted he did not know how to cook rice properly. October brought crisp mornings to the Bitterroot Valley, frost touching the grass, in the distant mountains dusted with early snow. The Japanese women had been at the facility for 3 weeks. Daily routines had settled into an uneasy pattern. They remained largely silent, moving through assigned tasks with efficient precision but minimal interaction with their American guards. Ben Carter, the young cowboy who served as one of the facility guards, noticed that one of the prisoners seemed to be struggling more than the others. Reiko Tanaka, 26 years old, had worked as a supply clerk in Manila. She had developed a persistent cough that grew worse each night as temperatures dropped. The barracks were heated, but the thin blankets provided were insufficient against the Montana cold, so different from the tropical climate where she had been captured. Ben had grown up on a ranch 30 miles from Missoula. His mother had taught him that suffering was suffering, regardless of who was experiencing it. He remembered how she had cared for sick animals and neighbors alike with the same practical compassion. Watching Reiko struggle through another coughing fit during the morning meal, he made a decision that required no permission from his superiors. That afternoon, while the women were at their work assignments, Ben went to the supply building and found an extra wool blanket. He also stopped by the camp medical station, where the nurse, Mrs. Patterson, gave him packets of honey and herbs that could be mixed with hot water for coughs. For one of the prisoners, she asked, eyebrow raised but tone neutral. Ben nodded. She handed him the supplies without further comment. That evening, Ben approached Reiko's barracks. Through the translator, Suzuki, he explained that he had brought an extra blanket and some remedy for her cough. Reiko stared at him with wide eyes, clearly shocked by this unexpected gesture. In all her military training and all the propaganda she had absorbed about American cruelty, nothing had prepared her for this simple act of concern. She accepted the blanket with a deep bow, murmuring thanks in Japanese, her voice thick with emotion. Ben nodded awkwardly, uncomfortable with her formal gratitude. "Just get better, ma'am," he said, then left quickly before the moment could become more complicated. Akira had witnessed the entire exchange from her bunk. After Ben left, she moved to sit beside Reiko, who was running her hands over the soft wool blanket as if it were something precious beyond measure. "He did not have to do that," Reiko whispered in Japanese. "We are his enemies. His country is at war with ours." "The war is over," Akira reminded her gently. But even as she said it, she wondered what that truly meant. If the war was over, what were they to each other now? The question hung in the air as Reiko wrapped herself in the unexpected warmth of an enemy's kindness, her cough finally beginning to ease. Word of Ben's gesture spread through the barracks that night in whispered conversations that lasted long after lights out. Something small but significant had shifted. The wall between them and their captors had developed its first crack. December arrived with heavy snowfall that transformed the Montana landscape into something that reminded Akira of Japanese woodblock prints. Beautiful but cold and austere. The Japanese women had never experienced winter like this. Even those from northern Japan found the dry, biting cold of the American West to be a new challenge. They bundled in coats that had been issued to them, moving between buildings with quick, careful steps on icy pathways. The approaching Christmas season created an odd atmosphere in the camp. The American personnel decorated the mess hall with evergreen branches and simple ornaments made from whatever materials were available. The Japanese women observed these preparations with curiosity and confusion. Most had heard of Christmas as a Western holiday, but few understood its significance or customs. Hayes had been thinking about the holiday and what it meant to have these women so far from home during what should be a family season. He remembered the loneliness of his own first Christmas away from home, working on a ranch in Wyoming when he was barely 18. These women were prisoners, yes, but they were also just people who had been caught up in forces larger than themselves. He approached Chen with a proposal. "Ma'am, I was thinking we might let the prisoners do something for Christmas. Maybe let them make decorations of their own if they want. Keep their spirits up." Chen considered this carefully. She knew that some in the local community would criticize any gesture that seemed too friendly toward Japanese prisoners. But she also recognized the wisdom in Hayes's suggestion. Depression and despair could create problems that strict discipline could not solve. Make it clear it is voluntary, she told him. We are not forcing American customs on them, but if they want to participate, I see no harm in it. Through Suzuki's translation, Hayes extended the invitation to the women. They could create decorations using papercloth scraps and other materials from the craft supplies. They could also share their own winter traditions if they wished. The response was cautious at first. The women gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices about whether this was some kind of test. But Akira saw an opportunity. Perhaps she suggested to the others, this is a chance to show them something of our culture, to help them see us as more than just enemies. Hana agreed enthusiastically. She had been learning English phrases from some of the friendlier guards and felt ready to attempt more communication. Several other women, inspired by Ben's earlier kindness to Reiko, decided to participate. Over the next few days, the barracks became workshops of quiet creativity. The women folded origami cranes from colored paper, created simple arrangements that mimicked the minimalist beauty of Japanese winter decorations, and even fashioned a small representation of a Shinto shrine from wood scraps. When they presented these to Hayes, his weathered face broke into a genuine smile. These are real fine, he said, admiring the delicate paper cranes. Real fine indeed. The decorations were hung in the mess hall alongside the Christmas evergreens, creating an unexpected blend of two cultures sharing the same space. But what the women did not know as they prepared these small offerings of culture and hope was that within 6 weeks, letters would begin arriving from the International Red Cross. Letters that would shatter what little remained of the lives they had left behind. And that shattering would lead to a decision none of them could have imagined making. The morning of December 23rd began like any other. The women filed into the mess hall for breakfast. But Hayes had been doing some thinking, prompted by a conversation with his wife Margaret the previous evening. She had asked what the Japanese prisoners would eat for Christmas dinner, and Hayes realized he had no good answer. The women still struggled with American food, eating only what they needed to survive, but never with any enjoyment. That is when Margaret had made a simple suggestion. Why did not you just ask them to show you how to cook their food? You have got rice sitting in that storehouse. Let them cook it the way they know how. It was so obvious that Hayes felt foolish for not thinking of it sooner. After breakfast, Hayes approached Akira through Suzuki's translation. Ma'am, I got a question for you and the other ladies. We have got rice in storage, but every time we try to cook, it comes out wrong. Too sticky or too dry or burnt on the bottom. I was wondering if maybe you could show us how to do it proper. For yourselves and for us, if you are willing. Akira stared at him, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. An American foreman was asking Japanese prisoners to teach him how to cook. It seemed absurd, impossible. Yet his weathered face showed nothing but sincere interest. She turned to the other women, translating quickly. Their reactions ranged from confusion to cautious hope. You want us to cook rice for everyone? Akira asked in her careful English, which had been improving through daily exposure. Hayes nodded. Yes, ma'am. Figure if you ladies are going to be here a while longer, might as well eat food that sits right with you. And I will admit I am curious. Never had rice cooked by someone who knows what they are doing. Hana stepped forward, her young face showing the first real animation since their arrival. I can show, she said in halting but clear English. My mother, she teach me. I cook for my family. Other women murmured agreement. Reiko, now recovered from her cough thanks to Ben's kindness, offered to help. Even the older women who had remained most distant began to show interest. That afternoon, Hana and 3 other women were escorted to the mess hall kitchen. The camp cook Samuel, who had been skeptical of the whole arrangement, watched as Hana examined the rice, tested the water, and explained through gestures in broken English the proper ratios and techniques. She showed them how to wash the rice until the water ran clear, how to let it soak, how to judge the heat and timing. Her hands moved with practiced grace, measuring water with her fingertips the way her mother had taught her. Samuel watched with growing interest. Never seen anyone put so much care into cooking grain, he muttered. There is an art to it, I reckon. Hana smiled at this, her first real smile since arriving in Montana. Rice is life, she explained in halting English. In Japan, we say rice is our heart. Samuel nodded thoughtfully, beginning to understand that food was far more than sustenance. It was identity, culture, connection to home. The next morning when breakfast was served, there were two options: the standard American meal and properly cooked Japanese rice with simple vegetables. The mess hall fell silent as Americans and Japanese alike witnessed this small but profound gesture of cultural exchange. The rice changed everything in ways no one had anticipated. What began as a simple accommodation became a daily ritual that transformed the dynamics of the entire camp. Each morning, Hana and a rotating group of Japanese women would arrive at the kitchen before dawn to prepare rice for breakfast. Samuel, initially resistant, found himself genuinely interested in their techniques and precision. The morning cooking sessions became opportunities for unexpected conversations. Ben started arriving early ostensibly to help with security, but actually to watch the cooking process and attempt communication. His simple questions about Japan, asked through Suzuki or in broken phrases, opened doors that formal interrogations never could have. "What is your home like?" he asked Reiko one morning as she prepared pickled vegetables to accompany the rice. She paused, considering how to explain Osaka to a Montana cowboy. "Many people," she finally said, "always moving, many sounds. Not like here." She gestured toward the vast, empty landscape visible through the kitchen window. "Here is quiet, strange quiet." Ben understood. "Must feel pretty lonely being so far from all those people." Reiko nodded, surprised by his insight. In that moment, something shifted. She was no longer just a prisoner. He was no longer just a guard. They were two people trying to understand each other across an enormous divide. Hayes noticed these changes with satisfaction. The mess hall had transformed from a place of tense silence to one where conversations, however halting, were becoming common. Some of the ranch hands who worked at the facility began asking the women to teach them Japanese words. The women in turn practiced their English with increasing confidence. Akira found herself at the center of these exchanges. Her natural leadership and growing language skills made her an unofficial bridge between the two groups. She translated not just words, but cultural concepts, helping both sides understand the gestures and customs that could otherwise cause confusion. When Margaret Hayes visited the camp to bring Christmas supplies, Akira helped the women understand that the American custom of handshaking was a gesture of respect, not aggression. The Christmas dinner that year featured both traditional American turkey and properly prepared Japanese rice, pickles, and vegetables. As both groups sat together in the mess hall, the boundaries between captor and captive seemed to blur slightly. Hayes raised his glass of apple cider in a toast. "To understanding," he said simply. Akira translated, and the Japanese women raised their glasses in return. "Rikai," they responded. Understanding. It was a small word, but it contained enormous possibilities. For the first time since their arrival, some of the women allowed themselves to imagine that this strange, cold place might become something more than a prison. But they did not know what was coming. The letters were already in transit, carried across the Pacific by ships that moved with agonizing slowness. Letters that would force them to confront losses they had hoped against hope they might have avoided. Letters that would change everything once again. January 1946 brought bitter cold and a different kind of chill to the hearts of the Japanese women. The International Red Cross had finally established communication channels with occupied Japan, and the women were permitted to send inquiries about their families. They had written letters months ago, careful messages asking about parents, siblings, children left behind. Now finally responses were beginning to arrive. Or rather, the lack of responses was becoming painfully clear. Akira sat in the small library room that Chen had designated for the prisoners' use, staring at the single letter she had received. It was not from her family. It was from a Red Cross worker in Yokohama, and the words on the page blurred as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Your family's neighborhood was destroyed in the firebombing of March 1945. No records of survivors could be found. Her parents, her younger brother, her grandmother, all gone, likely vaporized in the firestorm that had consumed vast sections of her city. She read the words again and again as if repetition might change their meaning. The letter was clinical, apologetic, final. She felt nothing at first, just a strange numbness that seemed to spread from her chest to her limbs. Then Hana entered the room, her young face streaked with tears, holding a similar letter. Tokyo had burned. Her family's home was gone. No information available about survivors. One by one, the women gathered as responses arrived, or more cruelly, as the lack of responses confirmed their worst fears. Of the 40 women in the camp, only 8 received letters from surviving family members. The others faced uncertainty, or worse, confirmation that everyone they had loved was gone. Reiko learned that her parents had died in Hiroshima, victims of the atomic bomb that had ended the war. The irony was crushing. She had survived combat capture and imprisonment only to discover that her family had not survived peace. The Americans in the camp watched helplessly as the Japanese women struggled with grief. Ben found Hana crying behind the mess hall one afternoon, her small frame shaking with sobs. He stood awkwardly, uncertain what to do. Finally, he simply sat down beside her in the snow, not touching, not speaking, just being present in her grief. After several minutes, she looked at him through her tears. "All gone," she whispered. "Everyone gone." "I am sorry," Ben said the words, feeling inadequate but sincere. "I am real sorry." Chen approved additional counseling sessions and gave the women permission to create a memorial space in their barracks. They crafted a small Buddhist altar from available materials, placing photographs and written names of lost family members. Each evening they gathered there to pray and remember their collective grief, binding them together in ways that shared nationality alone never had. Hayes watched this grief with a heavy heart. These women had served an empire that had attacked his country, yet now they seemed less like enemies and more like victims of the same terrible war that had taken so many American lives as well. War, he realized, created orphans on every side, and orphans needed care, not punishment. But what none of them knew was that more revelations were coming. Newspapers from the mainland were making their way to Montana. Articles about the Tokyo war crimes trials, photographs and testimony about atrocities committed by Imperial Japanese forces, information that would force the women to confront not just what had been done to them and their families, but what had been done in their nation's name. February 1946 brought more than cold winds to the Montana facility. It brought truth delivered in black and white newsprint. Chen had debated whether to allow the women access to American media coverage of the war's aftermath, but ultimately decided that ignorance would be more harmful than knowledge. The women needed to understand what their country had done and what had been done to it in return. The first articles focused on the Tokyo war crimes trials, which had begun in earnest. Names that the women recognized, generals and politicians they had been taught to revere, were now being charged with crimes against humanity. Details emerged about the Bataan Death March, about the treatment of Allied prisoners of war, about atrocities committed across Asia in the name of the Emperor, and the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Akira sat in the library reading accounts that made her hands shake. She had known about prisoners of war. Of course, Japan had captured many enemy soldiers, but the descriptions of systematic cruelty, starvation, torture, and execution were beyond anything she had imagined. She thought of the American guards who had shown her kindness, Ben bringing blankets to Reiko, Hayes asking them to teach him to cook rice, Samuel in the kitchen watching Hannah with genuine respect. And she felt a wave of shame so powerful it nearly made her sick. Ben found her there, her face pale and drawn. "You all right, Miss Yamamoto?" he asked, using the formal address that had somehow evolved into a gesture of respect rather than distance. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with horror. "Did you know," she asked, "about what Japanese soldiers did to American prisoners?" Ben shifted uncomfortably. "Some of it. Had a cousin who was captured in the Philippines. He did not make it home." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Akira spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am sorry. I did not know. We were told that Japan was defending itself, that America was the aggressor. I believed what I was told." Ben nodded slowly. "Reckon that is what happens in war. Everybody gets told stories that make their side look right." But the revelations continued. More newspapers arrived with photographs of Pearl Harbor's aftermath of bombed hospitals and civilian casualties across the Pacific. The women gathered around these articles, forcing themselves to confront what had been done in their nation's name. Some refused to believe the accounts, insisting it was American propaganda. But most, like Akira, felt the weight of a terrible truth settling over them. They had served an empire built on lies and cruelty. They had believed themselves to be defenders when they were actually tools of conquest. Hannah approached Hayes one afternoon as he supervised work assignments. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her English much improved over the months, "I have question why you are kind to us after what Japan did to America." Hayes considered this carefully, his hand unconsciously touching the pocket where he kept Billy's letter. "Because I figure you did not bomb Pearl Harbor personally. You did not torture prisoners. You were just young women who got swept up in something bigger than yourselves. Same as a lot of American boys who got swept up in this war." His answer did not erase the guilt, but it offered something the women desperately needed: the possibility that they could be held accountable without being condemned forever. But for Akira, the guilt ran deeper, because she had not just been swept up. She had been trained, had served, had coordinated signals that directed artillery fire. In Okinawa, in June 1945, and somewhere in this facility in Hayes's office, perhaps there might be records. Casualty reports, names and dates. She had been too afraid to look. But the fear was eating at her. Because if she was honest with herself, if she stopped hiding behind the comfort of ignorance, she knew. She had been in Sector 7. She had coordinated fire on June 18th. And Billy Hayes had died that day in Sector 7. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone. Heavy, cold, unforgiving. And one night, unable to sleep, driven by a need she could not name, she found herself in Hayes's office during a cleaning assignment. Found herself looking at the photograph on his desk. A young man in uniform, bright smile eyes that looked like Hayes's eyes. Found herself reading the first lines of the letter beside it. "Billy, I am proud of you, son. Stay safe. Come home to us." The date, May 1945. And she knew with absolute certainty what she had done, who she had killed, whose family she had destroyed. The man who had shown her kindness, who had asked her to teach him about rice, who had created a space where healing might be possible. She had taken from him the person he loved most in the world. The weight of that knowledge was unbearable. And in the darkness of her barracks that night, Akira made a decision. There was only one way to balance the scales. Only one way to pay the debt she owed. She would wait for the right moment, for a night when the darkness felt complete enough to swallow her guilt, and then she would end it. What she did not know was that Daniel Hayes carried his own darkness, his own sleepless nights, his own struggle with the promise he had made to Billy, and that on a cold March night their paths would cross in a way that would change both of their lives forever. But that moment had not yet arrived. February gave way to March, and the women continued their routines, cooking rice each morning, learning English, creating small bridges across the vast cultural divide, not knowing that everything they had built was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. Late February brought an unexpected visitor to Fort Missoula. Lieutenant Chen received a telegram with growing unease. Colonel James Bradford would arrive within 24 hours to conduct a routine inspection of POW facilities in the western states. His reputation preceded him. Thorough, uncompromising. A man who believed in regulations the way some men believed in scripture. What the telegram did not mention was why Bradford had requested this particular assignment, why a decorated officer with a desk job in Washington would volunteer for weeks of travel through remote western camps. But Chen would learn soon enough. The staff car arrived on a gray morning clouds hanging low over the mountains. Bradford emerged, tall and rigid, silver hair cropped close to his skull. His aide, Captain Morrison, followed with a clipboard already in hand. Bradford was 51 years old, his face carved from granite, his eyes the color of winter ice. Chen met him at the administration building, saluting crisply. "Colonel Bradford, welcome to Fort Missoula." Bradford returned the salute with mechanical precision. "Captain Chen, I trust you received my list of required documents." "Yes, sir. Everything is prepared for your review." "Good. I would like to begin immediately." What Chen could not see, what Bradford would never show, was the photograph he carried in his breast pocket. Thomas Bradford, 24 years old, signals, officer killed June 18, 1945, on Okinawa, killed by Japanese artillery that had been directed onto his position with devastating accuracy. Bradford had received the telegram while attending a strategic planning meeting, had read it twice, his face showing nothing before excusing himself and walking calmly to his office where he had sat in silence for 3 hours. His wife Eleanor had not survived the grief. Heart attack, the doctor said 6 months after they buried their only child. But Bradford knew better. She had died of a broken heart, and he had been left alone with nothing but duty and a burning need to ensure that those responsible faced justice. The inspection began in the mess hall where Bradford observed the morning meal service with cold attention. He noted everything, the way the guards interacted with prisoners, the mixed seating arrangement, and most tellingly, the two breakfast options, American fare and properly cooked Japanese rice. He watched as Hana and two other women prepared the rice under Samuel's friendly supervision, their conversation mixing broken English and gestures. Watched as Ben Carter arrived early, ostensibly for security, but clearly engaged in the cooking process. "This is unprecedented," Bradford said to Chen, in his voice flat. "Prisoners of war preparing their own cultural food." Chen explained the rationale. Morale Health Geneva Convention compliance. The women had been unable to keep down American breakfast initially. This had been a practical solution that had produced positive results. Bradford made notes on his clipboard. "Or perhaps they have convinced you to provide special treatment." The words were spoken without inflection, but Chen heard the accusation underneath. She kept her face neutral. "Sir, all accommodations have been within regulation guidelines. We shall see." Hayes watched the inspection from a distance, recognizing something in Bradford's posture that made him uneasy. This was a man carrying weight, grief perhaps, or anger so tightly controlled it had fossilized into something harder. Over the next 2 days, Bradford interviewed guards separately, asking pointed questions. "Has any prisoner attempted to share information about Japanese military operations? Have you observed any concerning behavior? Has the facility commander shown any indication of being compromised in her judgment?" He took meticulous notes, creating a paper trail with the patience of someone building a legal case. Ben found himself in the interview room facing Bradford's cold scrutiny. "Private Carter, I understand you have developed a rapport with some of the prisoners." Ben shifted in his chair. "I treat them with respect, sir. As we were instructed, respect is one thing, friendship is another. Have you provided any prisoner with items beyond standard issue?" Ben hesitated. The blanket for Reiko had been months ago, but he could not lie to a superior officer. "I gave a prisoner an extra blanket when she was sick, sir, and some honey for her cough." Bradford made a note. "Without authorization. The nurse gave me the honey, sir. I was just trying to help. Help the enemy." Bradford looked up, his gaze piercing. "Do you understand that these women served the empire that killed thousands of American soldiers? They were just doing their jobs, sir, same as our boys were doing theirs." Bradford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dismissed, Private." On the third evening, Bradford requested access to all personnel files for the Japanese prisoners. Chen hesitated, knowing the files contained sensitive information, but Bradford's clearance was unquestionable. He worked late into the night in the small office Chen had provided, going through each file with systematic thoroughness. Most contained minimal information. Name, age, roll date, and location of capture. But some had additional intelligence reports, attached information gleaned from interrogations, and captured documents. When he reached Akira Yamamoto's file, his hand paused. The basic information was standard. 24 years old, captured in Okinawa, listed role nursing assistant, but attached to her file was an intelligence report flagged during processing. Cross-reference documents from a captured Japanese military installation had identified her actual role. Signals operator, Women's Volunteer Corps, assigned to Sector 7, Okinawa. Service dates May through June 1945. Bradford pulled Thomas's death certificate from his own files. Compared the information. Thomas Bradford, killed June 18, 1945. Location Sector 7, Okinawa. Cause of death, artillery strike. He sat back slowly, the papers trembling slightly in his hands. The woman who had helped coordinate the artillery that killed his son was here, in this facility, being treated with kindness and respect, being taught English, being allowed to cook her cultural food each morning. The rage that filled him was white-hot and utterly silent. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the barracks where the women slept. Which building housed her? Did she sleep peacefully? Did she ever think about the men she had helped kill? Did she know what she had taken from him? Bradford spent another hour reviewing the file, then began cross-referencing guard reports, work assignments, and interaction logs. And that was when he found something else interesting. Akira Yamamoto was frequently assigned to clean the administration offices, including the office of ranch foreman Daniel Hayes. Bradford pulled Hayes's file, found the casualty notification for Billy Hayes. Nephew, June 18th, 1945. Okinawa, the same day, the same place, quite possibly the same artillery strike. And Hayes knew. Bradford was certain of it. The way Hayes watched Yamamoto, the protective stance he took when Bradford's inspection came near the Japanese women. Hayes knew what she had done, and he was protecting her anyway. The betrayal Bradford felt was almost physical in its intensity. This man, this civilian, was defending the enemy combatant who had killed his own family. It was unforgivable, and Bradford would make sure it was documented. But he would wait, gather more evidence, build an unassailable case, because when he moved against them, it would be final. March 12th, 3 in the morning. The facility was silent except for the wind moving through the fence wire. The guards rotated their rounds every hour, but there were windows of time when the perimeter was unwatched. Akira stood at the fence line, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. In her hand, a piece of broken glass from a jar that had shattered during kitchen work 2 days ago. She had kept it wrapped in cloth, hidden in her small bag of belongings, waiting for the courage to use it. The guilt had become unbearable. Every morning when she helped prepare rice, she thought of Billy Hayes, who would never eat breakfast again. Every time Hayes spoke to her with kindness, she felt the weight of what she had stolen from him. Every night she saw the faces of the American soldiers who had died because of her coordinates, her signals, her contribution to the machinery of war. She had tried to pray, but the words stuck in her throat. What right did she have to ask for peace when she had given death? The memorial altar in the barracks held her mother's name. But Akira could not kneel before it without thinking that her mother would be ashamed. Ashamed that her daughter had participated in atrocities. Ashamed that her daughter now accepted kindness from those she had harmed. There was only one way to balance the scales. Akira pulled the glass from its cloth wrapping. The edge caught moonlight, sharp and clean. She looked at her left wrist, at the blue veins visible beneath pale skin. It would be quick. The cold would help. She would simply sit down, make the cut, and wait for the darkness to take her. It was the honorable choice, the only choice. She brought the glass to her skin, felt the cold edge press against her pulse. 30 seconds of silence, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. Then a voice sharp and urgent, "Miss Yamamoto, stop." She looked up to see Hayes running toward her from the direction of the administration building. He had been doing paperwork, unable to sleep, haunted by thoughts of Billy, as he always was in the deep hours of night. Had seen a figure at the fence. Had recognized Akira's posture. He reached her just as the glass began to press harder, grabbing her wrist. "What are you doing?" The glass fell from her fingers, landing in the snow. Akira collapsed and Hayes caught her, lowering them both to the ground. She began to sob deep, racking sounds that came from somewhere beyond language. Why, Hayes demanded, still gripping her shoulders. What happened? Through tears, through gasps, through words that mixed English and Japanese in desperate confusion, the truth came pouring out. I killed him. I killed Billy. I was signals operator. Sector 7, June 18th. I coordinate the artillery. Your nephew. I killed your nephew. The words hung in the frozen air between them. Hayes went very still. His hands remained on her shoulders, but his face had gone blank, all expression draining away. He stared at this small woman, shaking with grief and guilt, and for a moment time seemed to stop. He thought of Billy's letter, which he read every night before sleep. Uncle Dan, if something happens to me, do not let it make you hate. Promise me. He had made that promise easily, not understanding how hard it would be to keep. You were a soldier, Hayes said finally, his voice rough. Billy was a soldier. You both did your jobs. Akira looked up at him, disbelieving. You not hate me, Hayes's voice cracked. I am trying real hard not to. Billy asked me not to hate. He made me promise. The words came slower now, weighted with pain. But I cannot do this alone. If you die now, I will have failed him twice. Once by not protecting him, and once by not protecting you. The mercy in those words was almost harder to bear than hatred would have been. Akira wept harder, and Hayes simply held her, this enemy who had killed his family, while the Montana wind howled around them and the stars wheeled overhead in their cold and distant patterns. He helped her to her feet, eventually walked her to the medical station where Chen and the nurse on duty tended to her. Hayes sat outside, head in his hands. For the first time since Billy's death, he allowed himself to weep. Not just for Billy, but for all of it. The waste, the pain, the impossible burden of forgiveness. What neither of them knew was that they had been observed. From the window of the administration building, Bradford had watched the entire scene unfold. He had arrived late, his car having broken down 20 miles from the facility, finally reaching Fort Missoula around 2 in the morning. Had gone to his temporary office to drop off his files. Had seen Akira at the fence. Had seen the glass. Had watched, curious to see what would happen. Would the woman actually do it? Would she take the coward's way out? And then Hayes had appeared. Had stopped her. And Bradford had heard enough standing at the cracked window to understand. She had confessed, and Hayes had forgiven her. Bradford's jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. Forgiveness was weakness. Sentiment was weakness. These people had forgotten which side they were on. And now he had everything he needed to destroy them both. March 15th brought official word from the War Department. Chen called a general assembly in the mess hall. All 40 women gathered along with American personnel. The announcement was straightforward. Within 8 weeks, transportation would be arranged for repatriation to Japan. The women would be processed through facilities in California, then transported by ship to Yokohama. The words should have brought relief. The war had been over for 7 months. They were finally going home. But the faces of the women reflected something far more complicated than simple joy. What exactly were they returning to? That evening, the women gathered in their barracks for a conversation that would change everything. Akira stood before them, her unofficial leadership now acknowledged by all. We must speak honestly, she said in Japanese. What waits for us in Japan? The answers came slowly, painfully. Reiko spoke first. My family is dead. My city is destroyed. I have no home to return to. Hana nodded agreement. Tokyo is rubble. Even if I find surviving relatives, where will we live? What will we eat? Others added their voices. Japan was occupied by American forces. They would be seen as failures, as women who had surrendered to the enemy. The shame culture of Japanese society would view them as tainted by their months in American captivity. Worse, they would be returning to a country they no longer recognized, one whose ideals had been revealed as propaganda built on atrocities. Sachiko, who had rarely spoken during their imprisonment, finally broke her silence. Here we have been treated with dignity. The Americans feed us, house us, even ask us to teach them about our culture. When was the last time anyone in Japan asked what we thought or wanted? The words struck a chord that resonated through the barracks. Akira felt a possibility forming in her mind, one so unprecedented she barely dared voice it. But she had learned over these months that speaking difficult truths was necessary even when they challenged everything she had been taught about duty and honor. What if she said slowly, some of us chose not to return immediately? The silence that followed was profound. To refuse repatriation was to refuse Japan itself to choose continued imprisonment over freedom in their homeland. It was unthinkable. Yet as the women sat in the gathering darkness, many found themselves thinking the unthinkable. In his office, Bradford was finalizing his report to the War Department. He had spent the day interviewing townspeople, documenting community sentiment. Some supported the women, many did not. He had collected signed statements from 17 citizens opposing any possibility of the prisoners remaining in the United States. His report was comprehensive. These women served Imperial Japanese military. They participated in war against United States. Several have confirmed roles in combat operations resulting in American casualties. Allowing them to remain sets dangerous precedent. Furthermore, facility commander and civilian personnel have demonstrated compromised judgment, showing inappropriate attachment to enemy combatants. Recommend immediate transfer to higher security facility pending expedited repatriation. He signed the document with satisfaction. This would force the issue, would prevent any possibility of these women avoiding justice by remaining in America. What Bradford did not anticipate was that his report would take 2 weeks to reach the right desks in Washington. And in that 2 weeks, everything would change. March 28th, another assembly in the mess hall. But this time, Chen had barely begun to discuss logistics when Akira stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady when she spoke in English, no longer requiring a translator. Lieutenant Chen, may I speak? Chen's eyebrows rose in surprise. Permission granted, Miss Yamamoto. Akira took a deep breath, aware that every eye in the room was fixed on her. American guards, Japanese prisoners, Hayes standing near the back wall, and Bradford taking notes from his position by the door. Lieutenant Chen, we have been discussing among ourselves for many days. Some of us wish to request delay of repatriation. She paused, choosing her next words with extreme care. Or perhaps not to return to Japan at all. The silence was absolute. Chen's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine shock. Hayes straightened from his casual lean. Ben and the other guards exchanged bewildered glances, and Bradford's pen stopped moving across his notepad. One by one, women stood. Hannah first, her young face set with determination. Japan is not home for us anymore. The Japan we served, we learned, was not the Japan we believed. Here we have found something different. Reiko stood. Sachiko stood. Others rose until 12 women were on their feet, forming a small group within the larger assembly. Chen struggled to find words. Ladies, I am not sure you understand what you are asking. Legally, you are prisoners of war. The Geneva Convention provides for your repatriation, not for extended residence in the United States. What you are requesting is unprecedented. Akira nodded. We understand it is unusual, Lieutenant Chen, but we ask you to send message to your superiors. Japan has nothing for us now. Our families are gone. Our homes are destroyed. Here we have learned what it means to be treated as human beings. We wish to stay where we have found dignity. Bradford stood, his voice cutting through the murmurs that had started to spread through the room. This is all very moving, but emotion is not policy. These women are prisoners of war. They will be repatriated as scheduled. He looked directly at Chen. Captain, I trust you will inform the War Department of this inappropriate request. Chen met his gaze steadily. I will inform the War Department of the request, Colonel. They will make the final determination. News of the request spread through Missoula within days. Chen's telegram to Washington had to pass through multiple channels, and at each level someone talked. By the end of the first week of April, the story had reached newspapers in San Francisco and Chicago. The Missoula Sentinel ran the story with a photograph of the facility. Japanese POW women refuse freedom. The article was factual, but its publication sparked immediate and heated debate. Letters to the editor poured in. Harold Buchanan, whose son had died at Guadalcanal, wrote with fury, "These women serve the empire that killed my boy. They should be grateful we are sending them home alive instead of treating them the way Japan treated our boys. The idea of letting them stay here is an insult to every Gold Star family in America." But other voices emerged. Margaret Hayes organized women from her church who had been visiting the facility as part of an outreach program. They wrote their own letter describing the transformation they had witnessed. These women are not the same people who arrived here 7 months ago. They have shown genuine remorse for their country's actions and genuine gratitude for the kindness shown to them. Is not forgiveness and redemption what we claim to believe in? The debate reached beyond Missoula. In San Francisco, a Japanese-American community newspaper ran an editorial questioning why Japanese women prisoners should receive consideration when Japanese-American citizens had only recently been released from their own camps. We were Americans imprisoned by our own country. They were enemy soldiers. Why should they be treated better than we were? At the facility itself, tensions grew. Some guards who had developed friendships with the women now felt awkward. Ben found himself confronted at the feed store in town. "You have gone soft on them Japs," one of the ranch hands accused. "They got you fooled with their bowing and their rice cooking." Ben's face flushed. "You ever spent time with them? Ever talked to them? Or are you just repeating what you read in the papers?" The confrontation nearly came to blows before older men separated them. Inside the barracks, the 12 women who had made the request dealt with their own divisions. Some of the other prisoners who had chosen repatriation viewed their decision as betrayal. "You shame all of us," one woman said coldly to Akira. "You choose comfort over duty to our homeland." The accusation stung because part of Akira feared it might be true. Was she being selfish? Was she choosing the easier path out of cowardice? The questions haunted her through sleepless nights. In late April, an unexpected visitor arrived. Father Robert Takeshi, a Japanese-American Catholic priest from Seattle, requested permission to speak with the Japanese women. He was 47 years old with graying hair and eyes that had seen both suffering and grace. He had spent 3 years at the Minidoka internment camp in Idaho. Chen approved his visit, hoping that spiritual guidance might help clarify the situation. Father Takeshi addressed the 12 women in fluent Japanese, his voice gentle but firm. "I understand your desire to remain here. You have found kindness when you expected cruelty. You have been treated with dignity when you feared shame. These are powerful experiences, and I do not diminish them." The women nodded, grateful for his understanding. But his tone shifted. "However, I must ask you difficult questions. You speak of Japan having nothing for you, of your homeland being destroyed. But is that not precisely when a country needs its people most? When everything is broken and must be rebuilt?" Akira felt the words like a physical blow. She had been so focused on what returning would cost her that she had not considered it from this angle. Father Takeshi continued, "You say you have no family waiting. But are there not other families in Japan who have lost daughters and need help? You say Japanese society will shame you for being captured, but who will change that society if not people brave enough to face that shame?" Hana spoke up, defensive. "But Father, we have learned so much here about democracy, about treating people with respect, regardless of rank or status. How can we return to a society that values only obedience and hierarchy?" The priest nodded thoughtfully. "That is perhaps the most important question. If you have learned these values, do you not have a responsibility to bring them back to Japan? My people, Japanese Americans, we are preparing to return and help rebuild Japan with American ideals of democracy and human rights. Perhaps you could do the same." Sachiko spoke quietly. "Father, I am tired. I lost my husband, my son, my home. I do not have the strength to rebuild a nation." Father Takeshi's expression softened with genuine compassion. I understand, and I am not here to judge your choice, only to ensure you have considered all its implications. Staying in America may seem like the path of redemption, but returning to Japan could be the greater act of courage and service. That night, the 12 women gathered again, but this time the certainty that had sustained them was shaken. Father Takeshi had forced them to examine their motivations with brutal honesty, and not all of them liked what they discovered about themselves. Over the next few days, doubt crept in. Sachiko announced she had changed her mind. Father Takeshi was right. I am tired, but perhaps I have enough strength left to help rebuild. At least in Japan, I understand the rules even if I no longer believe in them. 3 other women made the same decision. By the end of the week, only 8 women remained committed to staying. Akira Hanareko and 5 others. Bradford watched the numbers dwindle with cold satisfaction. He filed an additional report. Only 8 of 40 prisoners wished to remain. This demonstrates that initial request was impulsive and not well considered. Recommend that displaced person status be denied. Furthermore, recommend investigation into Ranch Foreman Hayes for potential violations of fraternization regulations. On the morning of May 1st, Bradford called a meeting in Chen's office. He arrived with an aide carrying a stack of documents. Chen and Hayes were already present, both sensing that something significant was about to happen. Bradford placed the documents on Chen's desk with precise care. I have here evidence that one of the prisoners, Akira Yamamoto, served as signals operator in Okinawa, June 1945, specifically in Sector 7, where she coordinated artillery strikes. He looked directly at Hayes, the same sector where your nephew, Private Billy Hayes, was killed on June 18th. The room went very still. Chen looked at Hayes. Daniel, did you know this? Hayes met her gaze steadily. Yes, ma'am, I knew. Bradford continued, his voice flat and relentless. And despite knowing that this woman helped kill your family, you have continued to show her preferential treatment. You have allowed her to work in your office, access your personal belongings, gain your trust. This demonstrates either severely compromised judgment or something worse. Hayes stood slowly facing Bradford directly. Colonel, with respect, you do not know what you are talking about. Enlighten me, Bradford said. Miss Yamamoto was a soldier. Billy was a soldier. They both did their jobs in war. Hayes's voice was steady, but his hand moved unconsciously to his breast pocket, where Billy's letter rested. Billy wrote me before he died. Asked me not to let the war make me hate. I made him a promise, and I am keeping it. Bradford's control slipped for just a moment, fury flashing across his face. Your nephew's letter is touching, Mr. Hayes, but irrelevant. These women are prisoners of war. They served an empire that murdered millions. The fact that some have shown you kindness does not erase their guilt. They are not avoiding justice, Hayes said quietly. They are choosing a different path. They want to rebuild their lives here, contribute to this country. Is not that what America is supposed to be about? Bradford pulled out another document. I have here signed statements from 17 citizens of Missoula, all opposing the request for these prisoners to remain in United States. I have War Department regulations stating that POW releases must consider community safety and support. This community does not support it. Therefore, all prisoners will be repatriated as scheduled. Case closed. Chen intervened. Colonel, with respect, the War Department has not made final decision yet. The women's request is still under consideration. Not anymore, Bradford said. I am filing recommendation today for immediate denial. He turned to Hayes. And Mr. Hayes, I am also recommending you be removed from your position for inappropriate fraternization with enemy combatants, specifically with the woman who helped kill your nephew. Hayes's world tilted. Akira's secret, the burden they had shared in that frozen moment by the fence, was no longer theirs alone. The battle for their futures was about to begin. After Bradford left Chen's office that morning, Hayes found Akira in the barracks. She was packing her small cloth bag, carefully folding the few items she owned. The other women in the room had gone silent, some refusing to look at her. Word had spread. Everyone knew now what she had been, what she had done. You heard, Hayes said quietly. Akira nodded without looking up. The colonel told everyone about what I did. Some of the women, they will not speak to me now. She folded a worn shirt with precise care. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps I should go back. Hayes sat down on the bunk across from her. Billy asked me not to hate, but he also taught me to fight for what is right. And what is right is not sending you back to a country that has nothing for you. I am going to fight for you, for all of you who want to stay. But I cannot do it alone. Akira looked up, finally her eyes searching his face. What do you need me to do? I need you to tell your story, the real story. Not as a soldier, not as a prisoner, as a person. The town hall meeting was Margaret Hayes' idea. She had organized it with the church women, believing that if the community could hear directly from the women themselves, hearts might change. The hall was packed on the evening of May 10th, supporters and opponents filling every seat standing along the walls. Bradford sat in the front row, notepad ready. Chen attended in official capacity, her uniform pressed sharp. Ben and the other sympathetic guards stood along the back wall, and in the front row on the opposite side sat the 8 women who had chosen to stay, Akira among them. Harold Buchanan spoke first, his voice heavy with the weight of loss. My son died at Guadalcanal. He was 19 years old. These women served the empire that killed him. Letting them stay here is a betrayal of every American who died in that war. They should go back to Japan and face what they have done. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several Gold Star mothers nodded. Veterans in the audience crossed their arms, their faces set hard. Margaret Hayes stood, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Buchanan, do you understand your pain? My nephew died in this war too. Billy Hayes was like a son to my husband and me. But Billy asked us not to let the war make us hateful. These women did not kill our boys. The war did. And if we send them back out of vengeance, we are letting the war continue. The room was split down the middle. Those who had lost family members in the Pacific Theater struggled to reconcile grief with mercy. Those who had visited the facility and met the women saw individuals rather than enemies. Then Hayes stood. The room quieted. Most of you know me, he began. I have lived in Montana my whole life. I have worked your ranches, helped your families. When Billy died, part of me died with him. And for a long time, I thought the only way to honor him was to hate the people who killed him. He paused, his weathered hands gripping the back of the chair in front of him. But then I met these women, and I learned their stories. They are not monsters. They are people who got caught up in the same war that took Billy. And one of them, he looked directly at Akira, was the signals operator who coordinated the attack that killed him. The gasps that went through the crowd were audible. Buchanan stood. Then why in God's name would you defend her? Hayes met his eyes. Because Billy asked me to. In his last letter, he asked me not to hate. And because when she found out what she had done, she tried to kill herself out of guilt. I found her. I saved her, and in that moment I had a choice. I could let her die and feel justified, or I could save her and give both of us a chance at something better than hate. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of someone weeping quietly in the back. Bradford stood, his voice cutting through the emotion. This is all very touching, Mr. Hayes, but emotion is not policy. These are enemy combatants who participated in war crimes against American soldiers. Community sentiment is clear. The vote will prove it. Then Akira stood. She walked to the front of the room, her small frame seeming even smaller under the scrutiny of so many eyes. She faced the crowd and spoke in careful English. My name is Akira Yamamoto. I am 24 years old. I was signals operator for Imperial Japanese Army in Okinawa. I helped coordinate artillery attacks against American soldiers. I did not know their names. I did not know their faces. I believed I was defending my country. Her voice was steady but quiet, forcing the room to lean in to hear. But I was wrong. Japan was not defending. Japan was conquering. I learned this only after I was captured, after I read newspapers. I learned what my country did, what I helped do, and I wanted to die. Her voice cracked slightly. Mr. Hayes saved my life. He had every right to hate me, but he chose mercy. He chose to see me as person, not as enemy. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot bring back the soldiers I helped kill. But if you let me stay, I will spend rest of my life building bridges, teaching Japanese and American children about war so they do not repeat it. This is my promise. Buchanan's response was immediate. That is a nice speech, miss, but promises do not bring back the dead. Go back to Japan, face what you have done there. Then Father Takeshi stood unexpected. He had been sitting quietly in the middle section observing. Mr. Buchanan is right about one thing. Promises do not bring back the dead, but neither does vengeance. I spent 3 years in internment camp as American citizen. I know what it means to be judged by your face instead of your heart. These women are asking for a chance, that is all. America's greatest strength is not our military. It is our ability to forgive, to offer second chances. Let us not lose that strength because of our pain. The mayor called for an informal vote, a show of community sentiment. Bradford objected. This is not a democracy, this is military matter. But the mayor insisted. These are our citizens who would be sponsoring them. We have a right to voice. The vote was counted by raised hands, 47 in support, 52 opposed. The town was divided almost exactly in half. Bradford's triumph was quiet but visible. There you have it. Community does not support this request. My recommendation to War Department stands. Repatriation proceeds as scheduled. The response from Washington arrived on May 20th. Chen called Akira to her office privately, wanting to explain the decision carefully before any general announcement. Miss Yamamoto, I have received official word from the War Department regarding your group's request. Akira's heart pounded as she took the offered chair. Chen read from the official document, then set it aside to explain in simpler terms. The decision is neither a clear yes nor a clear no. The War Department will not prevent immediate repatriation of anyone who wishes to return. However, given the unusual circumstances and the ongoing instability in occupied Japan, those who wish to remain may be reclassified from prisoners of war to displaced persons. Akira leaned forward. What does this mean, displaced persons? Chen explained patiently. It means you would no longer be prisoners, but you also would no longer be guaranteed support by the military. You would need to find American sponsors, families, or organizations willing to vouch for you and help you establish yourselves. You would need to find employment and housing. Eventually, you could apply for immigration status, but that process could take years and has no guarantee of approval. The weight of this reality settled over Akira. They would be trading the certainty of imprisonment for the uncertainty of displacement. No guaranteed shelter, no guaranteed food, no guaranteed acceptance. There is more, Chen continued. The decision requires that you make your final choice within 2 weeks. Those who choose repatriation will leave on June 1st. Those who choose to stay will be transferred to a displaced person facility in Missoula while sponsors are arranged. If sufficient sponsors cannot be found within 90 days, you will be repatriated regardless of your wishes. That evening, Akira gathered the 12 women to explain Washington's decision. The response was mixed and emotional. Hana remained determined. I have nothing in Japan. Here at least there is possibility. She was willing to accept any risk for the chance at a new life. But others wavered. Sachiko spoke quietly. Father Takeshi was right. I am tired, but perhaps I have enough strength to help rebuild. At least in Japan, I understand the rules. 3 other women made the same decision. The security of returning to Japan, even devastated Japan, suddenly seemed more appealing than complete uncertainty. By the end of the evening, only 8 women remained committed to staying. Akira, Hana Reiko, and 5 others. Their number reduced by doubt and fear. Bradford filed his final report. Only 8 of 40 prisoners wished to remain. This demonstrates initial request was impulsive and not well considered. Recommend displaced person status be denied. Furthermore, recommend investigation into ranch foreman Hayes for violations of fraternization regulations with enemy combatants. On May 25th, Bradford confronted Hayes directly in the stable where Hayes was inspecting equipment. Hayes, I have recommended you be removed from your position. You have become too emotionally involved with the prisoners, particularly with the woman who killed your nephew. That is not just poor judgment, it is borderline treasonous. Hayes continued his work, not looking up. Colonel, you lost your son. I understand that pain, but you are using regulations to punish people for your grief. That is not justice, that is just cruelty with paperwork. Bradford's voice went cold. You have no idea what you are talking about. My son died believing in something, believing America would win and make the world better. And you want to reward his killers by giving them American citizenship. Hayes finally looked up. Your son died fighting for freedom, including the freedom to choose mercy over vengeance. If you deny these women a chance, you are betraying what he fought for. Bradford's face tightened. The War Department is reviewing my recommendations. In 2 weeks, we will see who was right. He walked away, his back rigid with controlled fury. June 1st arrived with clear, bright sunshine. The day held both endings and beginnings, farewells and uncertain futures. 32 Japanese women prepared for repatriation to their homeland, while 8 women prepared to take the most uncertain gamble of their lives by remaining in America. The scene at the facility was unlike anything in the history of American prisoner operations. There was no formal military procession. Instead, the atmosphere resembled a community gathering complicated by the weight of diverging paths. The women who were leaving had packed their meager belongings, supplemented by gifts from guards and local families. Letters from American soldiers, small American flags, photographs taken during their months in Montana. These tokens of unexpected friendship would travel back across the Pacific, carried by women who had learned that enemies could become something else, given time and courage. Margaret Hayes had organized a farewell gathering the previous evening, women from her church providing a meal that featured both American and Japanese dishes. It was during this gathering that the true transformation became visible. American women and Japanese women sat together sharing food and halting conversations. Some even embraced in farewell. Now, as the transport vehicles prepared to depart, Akira stood before the women who had chosen repatriation. In Japanese, she addressed them with words that carried both blessing and challenge. You are returning to rebuild our homeland. Carry with you what you have learned here about dignity, about kindness between enemies. Japan needs people who have seen a different way. Then switching to English, she addressed Chen and the American personnel. Thank you for showing us that honor can exist even in defeat, that humanity can survive even war. Miko, one of the departing women who had been among those most critical of Akira's decision to stay, stepped forward. Yamamoto-san, she said formally in Japanese. I still believe your duty is to return, but I understand why you choose differently. Perhaps we need both. Those who return to rebuild and those who stay to show that reconciliation is possible. The two women bowed deeply to each other, a gesture of mutual respect, despite their different choices. Ben stood near the transport vehicles, his face showing the strain of the moment. As the women boarded, several bowed to him, and he awkwardly returned the gesture, having learned this sign of respect. Reiko, whose cough he had helped cure months earlier, pressed a small origami crane into his hand. For kindness, she said simply, I do not forget. As the vehicles pulled away, carrying 32 women towards ships that would take them back across the Pacific, 8 who remained stood watching until the dust settled. They had chosen their path. Now they must walk it. Bradford watched from a distance, his face impassive. The numbers had reduced from 12 to 8. His recommendation to deny displaced person status gained weight with each woman who chose to return. But what Bradford did not know was that the War Department had already made their decision. The telegram was en route, delayed by routing through multiple offices, and when it arrived, it would force a final confrontation that would test everyone involved. The hearing was scheduled for June 15th in a small room at Fort Missoula. A panel of 3 officers from the War Department had traveled from Washington to make the final determination. Bradford was present as witness, Chen as facility commander, Hayes as character witness, and the 8 women, Akira, Hana, Reiko, and 5 others, sat in chairs along the wall. Bradford testified first methodical and professional. These women served Imperial Japanese military. They participated in war against United States. Allowing them to remain sets dangerous precedent. Furthermore, community opposition is significant, and Ranch Foreman Hayes has demonstrated compromised judgment. The panel questioned him. Colonel, your report mentions that one prisoner, Miss Yamamoto, was Signal's operator who may have contributed to American casualties. Can you elaborate? Bradford's voice was flat. Yes. Miss Yamamoto coordinated artillery strikes in Okinawa, June 1945. American soldiers died as direct result of her actions, including the nephew of Ranch Foreman Hayes. Yet Hayes supports her request to remain. The panel looked at Hayes. Mr. Hayes, is this true? Hayes stood. Yes, sir. You knew Miss Yamamoto helped kill your nephew, yet you support her. Yes, sir. Why? Hayes pulled Billy's letter from his pocket. This is the last letter I received from my nephew before he died. He read aloud, his voice steady. Uncle Dan, if something happens to me, do not let it make you hate. Promise me. I promised him, and I am keeping that promise. He paused. Miss Yamamoto was a soldier doing her job, same as Billy. When she found out what she had done, the guilt almost killed her. I found her trying to take her own life. In that moment, I had to choose. Let her die or save her. I chose to save her, because that is what Billy would have wanted. The panel was silent for a moment. That is admirable, Mr. Hayes, but personal forgiveness is not the same as granting citizenship. Chen testified next. Sirs, these women have been model prisoners. They have shown genuine remorse for their country's actions. They have contributed positively to facility operations. They have built bridges with local community members. I believe they would be valuable additions to American society. The panel noted community vote results. 52 opposed, 47 in favor, almost evenly divided. Chen responded, yes, sir, but 47 supporters is significant, and more have come forward since offering to sponsor. Then Akira was called. She stood, walked to the front, her small frame somehow carrying the weight of two nations, two choices, two possible futures. The panel looked at her. Miss Yamamoto, why should we allow you to stay? Akira spoke carefully, each word measured. I cannot give you good reason based on what I deserve. I do not deserve kindness. I helped kill American soldiers. But Mr. Hayes showed me that mercy is not about deserving. It is about choosing to see humanity, even in enemy. If you let me stay, I will dedicate my life to building an understanding. I will teach children about war so they do not repeat it. I will be bridge between Japan and America. This is not just my promise. This is my debt. The room fell silent. The panel conferred quietly among themselves. Bradford sat tense, jaw tight. Hayes held his breath. Finally, the panel chair spoke. This panel recognizes the unprecedented nature of this request. After reviewing all testimony and evidence, we find that displaced person status should be granted, conditional upon finding sponsors within 90 days, and conditional upon completion of immigration process. Bradford stood. With respect, sirs, I must object. The panel chair cut him off. Colonel Bradford, your objection is noted, but this panel believes that reconciliation serves American interests better than in continued enmity. These women will be given their chance. Bradford's face went tight with controlled fury. He looked at Hayes with something like hatred, then turned and walked out without another word. After the hearing, the 8 women embraced, crying with relief and joy and fear all mixed together. Chen congratulated them. Hayes approached Akira. You did it. Akira bowed deeply. No, we did it together. Within the 90-day window, sponsors came forward. Margaret Hayes and her churchwomen took responsibility for 3 of the women, including Akira. Local families, moved by the testimony they had heard, offered to sponsor the others. By September, all 8 had been placed in homes, given work opportunities, and begun the long process of building new lives. Hannah and Ben's friendship had deepened into something more. They married in the spring of 1947. a small ceremony that brought together American cowboys and Japanese women in a celebration that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. Reiko opened a small restaurant in Missoula teaching Americans about Japanese cuisine beyond rice. The others found their own paths weaving themselves into the fabric of Montana life. And Akira and Daniel Hayes, brought together by tragedy and held together by the choice to forgive, were married quietly in 1948. The town had mostly accepted it by then, though some never would. But Hayes had learned that keeping Billy's promise mattered more than keeping everyone's approval. 23 years later, in the spring of 1969, Akira Hayes stood in the kitchen of a ranch house outside Missoula, teaching her 15-year-old daughter Sarah how to cook rice properly. The ritual had become more than cooking. It was connection to heritage, a daily reminder of transformation, a bridge between two cultures that had once been enemies. Sarah was fully American, spoke English without accent, knew Montana better than she would ever know Japan. But Akira made sure she understood where half of her came from, what it meant, what it cost. The doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer it, returning moments later with a confused expression. "Mom, there is a Japanese woman here to see you. She says she knows you from the war." Akira's hands stilled in the rice water. She dried them slowly, her heart suddenly pounding. Very few people from those days came to visit. Most of the women who had stayed had built lives in different parts of the country. They stayed in touch through letters, but visits were rare. She walked to the front door. Standing on the porch was a woman in her 60s, well-dressed, with kind eyes that carried the weight of years. For a moment, Akira could not place her. Then recognition struck like lightning. Miko-san. The two women stood separated by 23 years and an ocean of experience. Then they embraced, both crying the tears of women who had survived impossible things and found grace on the other side. Inside over tea and rice, Miko explained, "I am in America for conference on United States-Japan relations. I had to come see you, to say thank you." Akira shook her head, confused. "Thank me? For what?" Miko's eyes filled with tears again. "When I returned to Japan, I was angry. Angry at you for staying. Angry at myself for going back. Everything was destroyed. People were starving. The shame of surrender, the occupation, it was almost unbearable." She paused, gathering herself. "But then I received your letters. You wrote about your life here, about the bridges you were building, about teaching American children to understand Japan, Japanese children to understand America. And I realized something. You did not abandon us. You opened the path for us." Akira started to protest, but Miko continued. "Your letters gave me courage to start friendship societies in Tokyo, to convince Japanese people that Americans were not demons, that reconciliation was possible. Every bridge I built because you showed me it could be done." She reached across the table, taking Akira's hands. "Do you remember what I said to you the day we left Montana? That perhaps we needed both. Those who return and those who stay. I was right, but I did not understand the full truth then. You did not run away from Japan by staying in America. You led the way for all of us." Akira wept openly now, the guilt she had carried for 23 years finally beginning to lift. "I thought you hated me." "I did," Miko said honestly. "For a while. But hate is exhausting. And your example, living proof that enemies could become family, that was more powerful than any speech I could have given." Several of the women who returned married American servicemen stationed in Japan. We started schools teaching both languages. We built memorials, not to victory, but to peace. And all of it started because you had the courage to choose something different. Sarah brought more tea, watching these two women who carried history in their tears and their laughter. Miko looked at her. "Your mother changed the world. Did you know that?" Sarah smiled. "She never talks about it. Says she was just trying to survive." Miko shook her head. "She survived by choosing to live differently. That is the hardest kind of survival." That evening, as the sun set over the Montana mountains, 3 generations sat together. Miko, Akira, and Sarah. They talked about the war, about the camp, about rice and kindness and the impossible choices that shape lives. Daniel came home from work, weathered now, at 66 but still strong. He shook Miko's hand with the same respect he had learned to show all those years ago. Still keeping that promise, Miko observed quietly. Every day, Daniel said simply. Later, after Miko had gone to her hotel, Akira stood at the kitchen window looking out at the darkening landscape. Daniel came to stand beside her. You all right? She nodded. Miko helped me understand something I have struggled with for 23 years. I always wondered if I was selfish for staying, if I took the easy way. And now I understand that there was no easy way. Only different kinds of hard. Those who went back faced one kind of challenge. We who stayed faced another. Both were necessary. Both were brave. She turned to look at him. Thank you for making the choice you made. That night by the fence, every day since, you could have let me die. You could have let me leave. Instead, you fought for me when I could not fight for myself. Daniel put his arm around her shoulders. Billy asked me not to hate, but you taught me what to do instead. You taught me that the opposite of hate is not just love. It is action. It is choice. It is showing up every day and choosing to see the person, not the enemy. In the living room, Sarah sat doing homework, completely American and completely unaware of how miraculous her existence was. The daughter of a man who lost family to war and a woman who helped inflict that loss. The daughter of forgiveness and mercy and the stubborn belief that people could change. Outside, the Montana sky deepened to purple and then black stars emerging one by one. The same stars that had shone over Okinawa in June 1945, over Tokyo and its burning, over prison camps and battlefields and all the places where people had died for causes they believed in. But inside the Hayes house, there was warmth. There was rice cooking on the stove, prepared the way Akira's mother had taught her, the way she was teaching her daughter. There was the quiet conversation of a family built from the ruins of war. The rice had been more than food. It had been the beginning of understanding, the first ingredient in a recipe for peace. One small gesture asking enemies to teach the skill they possessed had opened a door that led to friendship, to love, to lives rebuilt from ashes. 23 years after standing in that hearing room asking for a chance, Akira understood what she had created. Not just a life for herself, but a template for reconciliation. Proof that enemies could become family, that guilt could be transformed into purpose, that the hardest promises, the ones made in grief and kept in courage, were the ones that changed the world. And somewhere across the Pacific, in schools and friendship societies and quiet homes, the women who had returned were telling similar stories, building similar bridges, all of them connected by 6 months in a Montana prison camp where the simple act of cooking rice had taught them that humanity could survive even the deepest hatred. The war had ended in 1945, but the peace, the real peace that lived in hearts rather than treaties, was still being built. One meal at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one choice repeated daily to see the person rather than the enemy. That was the legacy of the rice. That was the promise kept.